Hey guys, how's everybody doing? This is the Progressive Square. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Kevin Asana, your host, and we're going to get into some interesting topics tonight, as usual. Before we get started, I just want to let everybody know to please check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/ProgBlacksmith. And if you can become a patron and give me a generous contribution, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, remember, if you want more information about this podcast, check out the hashtag #TheProgSquare on Twitter. That will direct you to all of my live broadcasts on Periscope, as well as every segment I post on YouTube. All right, let's go with the first story here today. So, as many of you know, the Democratic debates took place this past week. There was one on Tuesday, and there was another one on Wednesday. One of them featured Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren among about 8 other Democrats, and then the other debate featured Joe Biden, Tulsi Gabbard, Kamala Harris, among 7 other Democrats as well. So the first night of debates was very exciting. It was very interesting. Mainly, it seemed like it was Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren against everybody else, against the world. So they were kind of just going at it with all the other Democrats, especially when it came to progressive issues, because those are the two more progressive people in this crowded Democratic field. But I think many would agree, obviously, that Bernie Sanders is a lot more to the left than Elizabeth Warren is. So, as usual, there's articles and opinions that are out there that are kind of put out in the media and stuff. And the mainstream media obviously had their take. And I found one to be particularly preposterous regarding the performances of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So this article is from NBC News. It's written by somebody named Jonathan Allen, who's pretty much been like a mainstream media kind of, typical establishment type so-called journalist. And he wrote this for NBC News. And the title of the piece is "The Warren-Sanders Wing Comes Up Short." And it says, analysis, the progressives looked it says, analysis, the progressives look to demonstrate that it would take big, bold ideas to beat President Donald Trump, but instead looked vulnerable to the more friendly fire of fellow Democrats. So let's get into it here. It starts out by saying the progressive all-stars lost in a draw, facing a field of more centrist Democrats trailing them in the 2020 presidential primary polls. Liberal Senators Bernie Sanders, Independent of Vermont, and Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, locked arms at Tuesday's CNN debate here to make the case for their, quote, Medicare-for-all health insurance plan and other, quote, bold progressive changes to public policy. If they were going to demonstrate convincingly that it would take big, bold progressive policy ideas to beat President Donald Trump, surely it would have helped to wipe the floor with the other 8 lower stature Democrats on stage with them. But that didn't happen. Not at all. If anything, they looked vulnerable to the more friendly fire of fellow Democrats. Warren and Sanders were ambushed before they could speak. And then this is quoting one of the irrelevant Democrats that was on the stage with them. It was, this one is John Delaney. It says, we can go down the road that Senator Sanders and Senator Warren want to take us, which is with bad policies like Medicare-for-all, free everything, and impossible promises that will turn off independent voters and get Trump reelected. And then it references that's actually obviously a quote from, as I said, a quote from John Delaney, and it says who's owner of a 0.7% average in recent polls, And this is what he said in his opening remarks that compared the senators to defeated liberal Democratic nominees George McGovern, Michael Dukakis, and Walter Mondale. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Warren and Sanders insisted that only sweeping changes that would fundamentally change political and financial structures would both motivate voters to go to the polls and improve their lives. We have to think of this in the big frame, Warren said. These insurance companies don't have a God-given right to make $23 billion in profits and suck it out of their healthcare system. And the field countered the way that Representative Tim Ryan, Democrat of Ohio, did when he criticized Sanders' explanation of the Medicare-for-all proposal because it would move union workers out of private insurance plans. It's bad policy, Ryan said, and it's certainly bad politics. Democratic strategists who watched the back and forth between two ideological sides in the party said it was tough to say which one won. There is a clear fight for the soul of the party, said Chris Kofinas, who has worked on Democratic presidential campaigns in past 2 election cycles. It's just not clear based on this debate who's winning. I think it's pretty obvious that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren won that debate for sure. And I said that, and I said as much in my post-debate coverage as well. Recent polling suggests that together, Sanders and Warren have about 1/3 of the primary electorate behind them, which is in line with the share that favors frontrunner and former Vice President Joe Biden. But there are no other candidates in the race who are consistently progressive on issues or as persistently aggressive in their pitch for big changes as Warren and Sanders. That puts the onus on them to build a stronger following among Democratic primary voters, either it's tandem or separately, to capture the nomination for their wing of the party. It says, this was the left's first big shot, and it just didn't hit. Almost seemed like a draw, which is a reflection of where Democrats are in terms of those who want to see real progressive changes on healthcare versus those who want to improve upon our current policies and defeat Trump. Adrian Elrod, a former aide to Hillary Clinton and an MSNBC political contributor, said in a text message. Of course, that wasn't the read from the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which has all but trademarked the term bold progressive, endorsed Warren, and has been supportive of Sanders. The conservative Democrats came at Warren and Sanders. Warren and Sanders, I guess, combining the name, and the progressive, or the two names, and the progressive tag team won because their bold ideas are both popular and good policy. Stephanie Taylor, co-founder of the PCCC, said in a statement, "The 1-2 punch of Warren and Sanders won the debate by making the case for a bold, progressive, transformational presidency that proposes big solutions to the big problems in people's lives." But there are Democrats who believe that the big change theory could be too much for swing voters in the states that their party needs to win to capture the White House. More incremental policy adjustments offered by candidates such as Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, Ryan, referring to Tim Ryan, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, could resonate better in those places, they argue. Let's be honest, D.C., New York, Boston, and California are progressive echo chambers, just like Democratic Twitter. Ben LaBolt, a former aide to President Barack Obama, said in an email, "Midwesterners are practical and pragmatic people who, in my experience, are less into bold ideological reforms than they are chipping away at issues that matter to their families. By leading so strongly on ideology, Warren and Sanders may not ultimately be reaching the persuadable voters in the battleground states. For now, Warren and Sanders still have work to do to win the war within the Democratic Party." So, obviously, I don't agree at all with this contention about Warren and, first of all, like I said, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, not in that particular order. I think Sanders did better than Warren. Obviously, I have a bias, but that's just how I saw it. But I believe that they definitely won the debate. They were the winners of the debate. I called it. After the debate, my post debate analysis, and I said that they won, and I still believe it regardless of what these articles say. And at the end of the day, I don't care what these, I've said this before, I don't care what these Democratic strategists have to say. These people are not in touch with reality. These Democratic strategists just want to push whatever establishment Democratic loyalist talking points they want. They don't want to push the idea of any kind of bold change, obviously, because even they admit that. So it's not particularly surprising. But when it comes down to like really understanding what the American people want and what the American people are going through, they don't understand that because they're working for, politicians in Washington. They're working for think tanks. A lot of them are have either been lobbyists or are in some kind of have some sort of relationship as far as like talking to lobbyists a lot. So they hear what lobbyists want to say and want to do. So they just push whatever those people say, and think tanks, lobbyists, other fellow aides and stuff, aides that work for the politicians, and let alone strategists, and and just the people that are on cable news and stuff, because a lot of the people appear on cable news as well. These people do not know anything outside of what they're programmed to believe by the kind of influence of Washington, D.C. and being inside that bubble. That's what they're in. They're in a bubble, and they don't really understand what it's like to be outside that bubble. Now, maybe obviously they go to different states and they talk with different people, but what they try and instill in the minds of those people, instead of actually listening to what the people have to say, instead of trying to listen, they instill in those people's minds, in whether it's Iowa, Ohio, I don't know, Virginia, throw any west, any kind of Rust Belt swing state out there, Wisconsin, Michigan. They tell these people that no, we need to do pragmatism. We need to do what's enough to not make too big of a change because we don't want to scrap what we already have. So what they do is they fearmonger about how, like, oh my God, for example, if we change Obamacare, so if we get, let's say, a Medicare-for-all plan, that's going to get rid of Obamacare. So this is a fearmongering point, that Joe Biden was putting out there. And he was telling everybody that if we get Medicare-for-all, if we do Medicare-for-all, it's going to mean the end of Obamacare. And, obviously Biden wanting to attach himself at the hip to President Obama, because that's his buddy Barack, as he calls him. And obviously he was his VP, but he still wants to attach himself at the hip to Obama because he knows that Obama's policies are, among Democratic partisans, is like 80 to 90% popular, basically. Putting aside like all the kind of like right-wing Democrats and even many moderate Democrats. But like if you ask any like left-leaning or even like left Democrat out there, I'm talking Democrats, not like leftists. I'm just talking people that are in Democratic like circles. They love Obama. They're like fucking obsessed with him. They think he's the fucking shit, essentially, and they think everything he did was right. You can't, how dare you attack anything that he says or has done? And this is something that you hear that you heard after the debate. People were saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe anybody is, attacking." President Obama. That is not a smart strategy from typical mainstream elitist types and, strategists and other, kind of people that are involved in the Democratic movement, in the kind of the party's establishment. And, they were saying that. And, so obviously the message among those kind of establishment type politicians and candidates is going to be to just talk about how, Obama is a great guy. All the policies that he's put forth are wonderful. And if he criticizes, it's terrible. And that's definitely something Biden has put forth for sure. Now, when it comes to all the other candidates, maybe they don't necessarily say like, they don't necessarily go down the path of like, obsessing over Obama as much. And I don't think they're not stupid enough to like, they're not stupid enough to make it as obvious as Joe Biden would. So in many cases, it's just a matter of like kind of praising the Democratic, quote unquote Democratic ideals. But at the end of the day, they want to, obviously they just want to maintain whatever, status quo the party has already put forth. And anything that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren put out there, God forbid you embrace that. Because if you embrace that, then you're just being too far left, which is bullshit. Because on an international standpoint, on an international spectrum, on a scale of what's going on around the world, getting Medicare for all, debt-free college, getting rid of student loan debt, because we're in a student loan debt crisis, having a living wage, let alone a $15 minimum wage, ending the wars, these are not radical things. These are all things that, every industrialized country across the world has either done or they just believe in and they just push for it, And when Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren say these things to Americans on a large standpoint and even unfortunately Democrats, that to them is too extreme, because you don't want to get away from the status quo. And for a long time, I always believed that the Democratic Party was actually like far left. Well, not far left, but I felt they were on the left. But that was largely because they believed in like the social issues, so gay marriage and, you know, not being racist and, you know, believing in, you know, like being pro-choice or believing reproductive rights. In my mind, I was like, oh yeah, they must be liberal, right? They must be left. But that's not true. They're not. You know, this was back when I was like still kind of like a Democratic loyalist myself. But I'm you know, far and away from that, you know, that frame of mind now. I don't believe anything close to that now, thank God. And you know, I know what errors the Democratic Party has made because I was witness to it. And a lot of it is just, it's just they still make these mistakes. They just like, they can't get away from like this horrible, like, you know, disease of just doing the same exact thing again and again. It's this ridiculous mentality where you have to like be establishment, you have to be status quo or else. And that's truly what they believe. And it's really, it's unfortunate considering this, you know, the state of our country and the fact that, you know, we're, you know, our country, the world, our globe is suffering through climate change, ridiculous amounts of climate change, ridiculous amounts of, you know, debt inequality, whether it's in this country or around the world. It's like that, you know, as Bernie Sanders says, you know, what is it, 5 or 6 people own, you know, 50% of the wealth in this world? I mean, come on. So, and you know, I don't know if that, I think it's 5 or 6 people. He said it multiple times, so that's the number I remember. But if you want to fact check me on that, that's perfectly fine. But the fact that, you know, it's the fact that that is the case, whether it's 50%, whether it's a third, whether it's a fourth, whatever, like that amount of money that people, because, you know, there's 7 billion people in this world. And when, you know, just a few people or however many people, like kind of a low number of people are, you know, they kind of own all that wealth while everybody else is suffering. That's a fucking problem. You know, no matter how much, you know, no matter, like, even if that number is just a little bit bigger, that still wouldn't fix the problem. We need to, you know, as many people on the left know, and as many people, you know, obviously far, you know, people that are leftists in this country, far leftists in this country, progressives and stuff, we know. But I mean, if you talk to people that are in, you know, even Democrats, they believe in like ending, you know, income inequality and, you know, not, you know, kind of narrowing that gap and stuff, you know, instead of widening it even more and more. But, you know, if you talk to the establishment status quo people, they don't care about that stuff. They just want to do that. They want to do all that stuff incrementally. And it's so typical of these establishment so-called journalists and stenographers for the you know, establishment to come out there and say, well, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders didn't win the debate because, I don't know, ask a bunch of stupid, you know, out of touch strategists and you know, people that, you know, are in Washington and in that bubble. So, but those people don't know anything. But if you go and talk to, you know, those people don't know shit. But if you actually go and speak to people that are suffering, people that are in all those Rust Belt states, middle of the country states, they know what's happening that needs fixing, and it's the problems that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are putting out there. More Bernie Sanders than Elizabeth Warren, but, you know, they're both at least speaking to that ideology, to that mentality. And Bernie Sanders has been totally consistent on that. He's called himself a democratic socialist or a social democrat. Elizabeth Warren is a little bit more to the right because she calls herself a capitalist, but either way, they are saying the right things, you know, and that's good to see. I've been very critical of Elizabeth Warren because I feel like she's a little bit of an opportunist, and I think that she may not be as genuine in what she's saying, but at least she's saying the right things, you know. Unfortunately, I hope a lot of people don't fall for that. I just kind of see her more as a gatekeeper for progressives and to kind of just be there to back up Bernie. And, you know, Bernie is the guy that I want, and that's the guy that many people on the left obviously want. And he is popular, he's well known, he's making inroads with all different, you know, demographics and people in this country, even people that are not on the left, even people that are disaffected Trump voters. He's making inroads with. So these people don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know what the whatever they type into their articles. It's just misinformed, and or they're just making, you know, arguments that just, you know, repeat the arguments that the, you know, people in Washington believe. That's it. They're just stenographers for DC elites, basically. And Bernie Sanders and to some extent Elizabeth Warren are fighting back against that. And I'm happy to see that they are doing that, because nobody else really seems to be doing it in our current political climate, especially in DC. So obviously, as many of you guys know, continuing, there was obviously a great debate that took place in the second night as well. I just spoke about the first debate between that included Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But then the second debate, I actually thought was not as substantive, because there was a lot more centrists on that panel on that stage of presidential candidates. But the two people that that definitely got the most attention was Kamala Harris and Tulsi Gabbard. So what happened was Tulsi Gabbard, Tulsi had gone after Kamala Harris before, and she criticized Kamala for, and this is something I did not agree with Kamala, did not agree with Tulsi Gabbard on, where she criticized Kamala Harris for going after Joe Biden and just trying to make a name, or just trying to make a name for her, something along those of trying to make a name for herself, or just trying to get attention, and using this as an issue just to attack Biden for stupid reasons, which I did not agree with. And she was kind of making a bad argument, agreeing with Biden about how he worked with segregationists and stuff. And so Tulsi was not right in that in her framing, or what she said during that. And this was after the debate. But in this debate, they asked her about that. They actually asked her about how she defended Biden, and smartly, I'm guessing this is something that she heard from her strategist, but smartly she stayed away from that, and she actually Tulsi actually changed that around and decided to go after Kamala Harris, but not on that same issue. She decided to go after her on a different issue. So I don't want to ruin it for you guys. So why don't you just listen to this clip? This is about a 3-minute clip of from the debate where Tulsi and Kamala are going at it, and then we're going to talk about it on the other side.
Body cameras on special agents in the state of California, and I'm proud of that work.
I want to bring in Congresswoman Gabbard. Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about reentering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response,
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who are on death row, innocent people. You actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Senator Harris.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced, to say, I will not seek the death penalty. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? When I was in the position of having to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty on cases I prosecuted, I made a very difficult decision that was not popular to not seek the death penalty. History shows that, and I am proud of those decisions.
Senator Harris, thank you very much.
So if you notice there, Kamala Harris did not address any of Tulsi Gabbard's points, and Tulsi Gabbard got a huge pop from the audience. You know, Kamala claims that, I did a lot of work in reforming the criminal justice system. That's not true at all. She put so many people. She put so many people in jail. She was responsible for putting, as Tulsi Gabbard mentioned, she maintained the cash bail system, which largely affects the minority and poor communities, whether you're white, black, whatever. But a lot of African Americans are affected by that. And Kamala Harris, being a person of color, being an African American, you would think like, you know what, you might want to fix that. Like that might be something you want to focus on and make a main issue for you to for you to kind of tackle and deal with, instead of perpetuating the system. And she only made it worse. And there's articles out there. I can put them for you guys on the description box below. But there's articles talking about how she put people in jail. So people that were like they were accused of crimes, and then they were kept. They were kept from there was a certain amount of evidence that wasn't, as even Tulsi Gabbard noted, there was evidence that was not allowed to be put onto the public record for Kamala Harris to consider this person not being innocent. Not being guilty, and instead being innocent. And she refused to hear it. She when it comes to the death penalty, she kind of waffled on that in her response. She's like, well, I always stood up against the death penalty, but you still allowed the death penalty to affect the life of somebody that was on death row, and then you refuse to take him off of it. I mean, yeah, the issue of death penalty is a serious issue when it comes to just kind of on a larger scale of just morality and human decency. It's a big deal. If you ask right wingers and stuff, they're like, oh no, we're all about the death penalty, we're all about putting killers to death and stuff, when in many cases there come situations where the wrong people are killed, let alone the fact that the cocktails that are put into their bodies to kill them, to put them to death, end up actually end up not working and forcing the person to suffer as they are pretty much dying, as they are lying there, suffering through basically a traumatic, as if they were getting shot in the chest. This is almost at the same level of just going through that kind of torture. And the fact that can't, that has happened, and I think that happened in Oklahoma once. One of the states was Oklahoma, I believe, and another one may have been Missouri. I forget. But yeah, these are issues that are involved in the discussion of the death penalty. But when it comes to Warren, though, yeah, her record on criminal justice and as Attorney General, as the District Attorney of San Francisco, are very, very checkered, very troubling. And after this happened, after the Tulsi Gabbard went after Kamala for this, the hashtag the next day, and I was seeing this on social media, specifically on Twitter, the hashtag Kamala Harris destroyed, or Kamala destroyed, kind of some derivative of that, basically with destroyed in there and her name. It popped up, and people started using that all over the place, and it got so much attention on Twitter, and it got to the point that Twitter had to actually find a way to hide it, and but yeah, leftists and people that don't agree with Kamala Harris's history as Attorney General and District Attorney, they went after her hard. I know I was one of them. I called out several people that were defending her, and they had no defense of her. Now, of course, the Kamala Harris campaign, as they did last time when Tulsi Gabbard, and I discussed this on the last show too. I did a segment on it where Tulsi went after her, and then she responded in a cheap manner, and Kamala Harris, once again, personally, she decided to respond in a cheap manner, and this is also something her campaign did too, but she did it this time. She decided to do it herself as well. So check out this post-debate interview that she did with Anderson Cooper, and then we'll discuss it on the other side.
Did you expect that from Tulsi Gabbard? Had you had interaction about that in the past, and how do you think it went?
Well, I mean, listen, this is going to sound immodest, but I'm obviously a top-tier candidate, and so I did expect that I would be on the stage and take hits tonight, because there are a lot of people that are trying to make the stage for the next debate.
Yeah, for a lot of them, it's do or die.
Well, yeah, and especially when people are at 0 or 1% or whatever she might be at. And so I did expect that I might take hits tonight. But, listen, I think that this coming from someone who has been an apologist for an individual, Assad, who has murdered the people of his country like cockroaches. She who has embraced and been an apologist for him in a way that she refuses to call him a war criminal. I can only take what she says in her opinion so seriously. And so I'm prepared to move on.
So look how condescending Kamala Harris is towards Tulsi Gabbard there. Does not respond to the question, respond to the accusations of her. Now, to be fair, she did during the debate. So even though she did horribly, answered horribly to Tulsi Gabbard, just kind of deflecting and distracting away from her record and saying, as we discussed, trying to rationalize her record as Attorney General and DA. But here she's just all out, just fucking, ridiculous attack about her being, Tulsi being a Assad apologist. This is something that she said, again, as I covered last week, this was something she said after Tulsi criticized her foreign policy record. Now, and I'm sorry, her campaign specifically went after, not Tulsi. But, and okay, fine. If you want to bring it up in a foreign policy conversation, a foreign policy kind of debate, that's a different story. This had nothing to do with foreign policy. This had to do with specifically her record as a district attorney and attorney general. So why are you talking about Bashar Assad? Bashar Assad is the president of Syria, having nothing to do. What did Bashar al-Assad affect your time as attorney general and district attorney? No, he didn't he didn't force you to make the decisions that you did. You made the decisions that you made. You went out there, you convicted people wrongly of things that they didn't do. You threw people in jail for, petty drug crimes, smoking marijuana, selling marijuana, drugs, crack cocaine, whatever it was. And you threw them in jail, and you perpetuated the system that unfairly puts African Americans in jail. Now, if you want to have the conversation of how, selling drugs and doing drugs is illegal, that's fine. But you're not helping the system when you are doing something that largely affects people that are minorities, that are people of color. And you being a person of color, you being a black woman, and a lot of people honestly supporting you because you are a black woman, the fact that largely your record is, because your record is not about your time in the Senate. She's only been in the Senate since 2016. When President Trump got elected, that was the year that she won the Senate. And that's not her legacy. Her legacy is Attorney General and District Attorney, and those are important parts of her career. And I think both times, I know for Attorney General she was 8 years. I think for District Attorney she may have also been 8 years, maybe 4 years. I'm not absolutely sure on that, but Either way, it's a huge, significant part of her time in, I guess you want to call it politics, but in her public duty, being in, having a role in the public and making decisions that affect the public. And she she has that reputation, she has that record, and she's proud of it. She claims to be proud of it. She puts it out there as, I did this and I did that for Attorney General and this as District Attorney, and I did criminal justice reform, blah, blah, blah. But when she's called out for the bad things that she did in those jobs, in those roles, she doesn't want to talk about it. She wants to talk about Bashar Assad and talk about how Tulsi Gabbard doesn't want to, address her time, address the fact that she went and supposedly was an apologist for him. And then, like I said I mentioned in my last segment, when Tulsi called out Kamala, she called her out for her lack of foreign policy experience. The Harris campaign, the Kamala Harris campaign, called her an Assad cheerleader for Assad, and I responded back then, which was, I don't know, I think it was last week, or a week before that. I responded, on Twitter, responding as calling Kamala Harris a cheerleader for Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's true because that's what she is. So if you want to call a spade, then okay, you're a cheerleader for the Israeli government that's run by a right-wing prime minister, and possibly even a fascist, for sure, a fascist prime minister who may even be racist. I mean, he's killing all these innocent Palestinian people, claiming they're part of terrorist groups like Hamas and everything. But no, you're killing innocent Palestinian people, Arabs. You're killing people that are not guilty of any kind of crimes, and they're not terrorists, but you're killing them anyway, and you're a racist. Has Kamala Harris said anything about that? No. In fact, what she does is she compares what the Israeli people in Israel have gone through to she compares that to the Black Civil Rights Movement. So during the times in the 1960s when Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and everybody was fighting against, the white segregationists and stuff, and fighting for their civil rights to vote and, have to be able to drink at the same, fountain as white people and ride in the, front of the bus and all that stuff. Somehow Kamala Harris thinks that's the same struggle that people in Israel have gone through, which is just, it's absurd. It just makes no sense. I mean, I'm telling you guys this, this, it's obvious that the things that she's saying is absurd, but the fact that she says these things, and then saying this thing about, Assad, and then, about Tulsi, and then saying she's, an apologist for him, and then, but not having the ability to self-reflect and see how she's an apologist for a right-wing Israeli government, is just amazing. I can't even see how. I can't believe that she's so myopic, and she obviously can't think objectively, and she just wants to go out there and just put out bullshit talking points. Tulsi went after her after this, and also in her own post debate, maybe even the next day or two after that, they spoke to her, and she said this is absurd, these attacks on her. And it's amazing, because what happened when Kamala and her campaign put out this Assad apologist or cheerleader for Assad message, the media was asking her about it. So what happened? The media was the Kamala Harris campaign was able to change the narrative, and able to get the media and able to manipulate the media into talking about a completely different issue instead of the issue at hand, which is the fact that Kamala Harris's record is horrible and has involved a lot of decisions as Attorney General and District Attorney that destroyed California and destroyed the lives of people in this state that I'm currently living in. But no, the media wants to do the bidding for the establishment and do the bidding for Democratic, establishment candidates like Kamala Harris, and they're going to ask the same questions that Kamala Harris's stupid ass campaign asks, like the smarmy pricks that work for her. They put out all this, Assad apologist shit, and then they just repeat it. So what does the campaign what does the media end up being? They end up becoming a stenographer for Kamala Harris and her spokespeople. That's it. I mean, that's what they do, and it's totally predictable. I mean, who didn't see this coming, right? They were obviously going to do something like that and that's Kamala Harris knew it, her campaign knew it, and they put that stuff out there knowing that the media was going to ask it because Tulsi Gabbard is so radical and so horrible for going to Syria and meeting with Bashar Assad, even though if you actually look into what Tulsi Gabbard did, she went and met with the Syrian people. She went and met with people that were struggling from the Syrian war, which is being perpetuated by the United States, Saudi Arabia, even to some extent Israel. And then, Syria has to defend itself with help from Iran and Hezbollah and Russia and stuff. And then what happens? They call Tulsi Gabbard a apologist for Assad for defending the Syrian people and then daring to have a conversation or meeting with Bashar Assad. And it's crazy. I mean, these people don't have any regard for objectivity or being fair. They just want to put out fear-mongering, propaganda and talking points so as to smear the person that is not, perfectly in line with the establishment. God forbid. So the next issue I wanted to get into was Medicare for All, but specifically Kamala Harris's Medicare for All plan. And she has a plan that supposedly, well, she calls it Medicare for All, but in reality, it involves the private insurance companies. It involves insurers that will maintain some sort of public option and everything, and that's whatever. I mean, that's fine if you believe in that. It's perfectly okay to have a view of the healthcare system that maintains the private insurers. I don't agree with it, but if that is your position, I'm fine with you believing that. Obviously, I'm going to oppose it as much as possible, but if you want to push that, that's fine. The problem is that Kamala Harris, and this is something that she said in the debate as well. I covered it during the debate, and gave my views on it during the debate. And what she did is she stated that she is in favor of Medicare for all, and that she believes that her Medicare for all plan is going to be, and she keeps calling it Medicare for all, that's the problem, but she says that her Medicare for all plan is going to be, obviously better than Bernie Sanders, and then it's going to be the main thing that's going to, get us universal coverage, but it has private insurers. So obviously it's not going to get us universal coverage if the private insurance companies are still involved. And so I just wanted to, before we kind of get into my commentary on this, I just wanted to read an article from Politico that kind of gets into the details of her, her position and what her plan is and everything, and then we'll discuss it as we read along and following the conclusion of the article. So this article is from Politico. It's the title of the article is Kamala Harris's new health plan, Medicare for all with private insurers. And then the subheadline says slower than Bernie Sanders, but more ambitious than Joe Biden. How Harris aims to achieve universal health coverage. So let's check it out here. It says Kamala Harris on Monday unveiled a plan to achieve universal health care coverage by growing Medicare with the help of private insurers, an effort that splits the difference with her chief Democratic presidential rivals and equips the California senator with her own signature health care proposal ahead of this week's debates. Medicare works, Harris wrote in a Medium essay published Monday morning. Now let's expand it to all Americans and give everyone access to comprehensive health care. Under Kamala Care, which would be phased in over a decade, 10 years, by the way, 10 years this plan would take to be implemented. Harris has at last settled on a way to keep private health insurers in the fold after seesawing on the question since January, and she would do so by leaning on an existing and popular federal program. Harris's offering maintains her commitment to universal health care coverage demanded by her party's base. I don't know, but that's not the party's base. That's maybe just kind of like Democratic loyalists. Wait, it says maintains her. Yeah, okay, I see what she's. I thought she meant wanting private insurance. Yeah, that's right. The universal healthcare coverage is something that the party's base wants. So, like, if they would have said Medicare for all, I would have understood what they meant. But okay, continuing on here, it says while lowering the temperature among the guardians of Obamacare who fear that overreaching would wipe out their hard-fought gains. Kathleen Sebelius, who served as Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Obama administration and was consulted on Harris's plan, blessed it as, quote, a smart way to get Medicare for all, where all individuals and employers can transition smoothly into a system that covers everyone. By the way, right now, Kathleen Sebelius, who was the HHS secretary under Obama, apparently worked for a healthcare company now. So when she takes a position that embraces Kamala Harris's idea to maintain the private insurers and the healthcare companies, I mean, are you surprised by that? That's the way it goes, right? It's not surprising at all. Somebody that's obviously, working for a healthcare company is going to love a healthcare plan that maintains those healthcare, the status and the existence of those healthcare companies. So continuing on here, it says, but Harris's proposal skimps on myriad details, including the plan's cost, and will likely still face skepticism from progressives. Worried about propping up insurance companies and the slower pace of change, as well as from conservatives and deep-pocketed healthcare lobbyists, staunchly opposed to any form of Medicare expansion. Healthcare has consistently been a top issue, if not the leading concern among voters nationally and in the key early voting states, but has bitterly divided the Democratic primary. It says, throughout the campaign, Harris has publicly wavered on whether her health plan would eliminate private insurance, and the months of seeming reversals exposed her to bipartisan attacks and criticism that she risked looking inconsistent or worse, coming off as pandering. After raising her hand at June's Democratic presidential debate, suggesting she favored abolishing private health insurance, Harris the next day said she had misinterpreted the question, which she took to mean giving up her own private plan to enroll in a government plan. Wait, that doesn't make sense, though, because how would you have a private plan for yourself? Kamala Harris is a member of the Senate. She works for the government. So how would she have a private plan? She has a government plan. And the plan, as many people know, the plans that people have when they are working for the government essentially is universal government health care. It's Medicare for all, essentially. It's a single-payer system. But it's government-run. Whatever it is, it's government-run health care, And they get funded by the taxpayers, which ironically, they get funded by the taxpayers to fund their salaries. So their salaries are funded by us, and that also means that since we're funding the government with our taxpayers, we're also funding her health care as well. So I don't know why she's talking about how, she would get confused. And because I did a segment on this too, and I was confused at the time. But now that I see the explanation for it, it says she thought the moderators at the last debate were asking her if she would give up her own private plan. But you don't have private insurance. You have government-run insurance because you're the member of the Senate. Okay, anyway, so I don't know. I guess it's useless to try and make any sense out of somebody that doesn't make any sense. The next part here says 70% of Americans favor Medicare for all if given a choice between a government plan and private insurance, according to a recent NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll, but just 4 in 10 support a mandatory government plan for all. Harris's new plan breaks with her rivals who occupy the opposite poles of the debate by effectively proposing Medicare Advantage for all, permitting private insurers to continue selling plans akin to the 2-decade-old offshoot of Medicare, in addition to letting Americans immediately buy into the traditional Medicare program and adding new benefits, like more mental health services. It says, as a result, Americans would be able to choose between the public plan and certified private Medicare plans. Harris also said she would immediately enroll newborns and the uninsured in an effort to quickly get to universal coverage if elected. Yeah, the rest of this article just gets into it just talks about how just give some stats about the Medicare enrollees being covered through Medicare Advantage, and a couple people commenting. I think it even shows Sebelius here. It says Catherine Sebelius gave her own little statement. A former Obama administration official who oversaw Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act also commented. And I think that's actually somebody that attacked Bernie Sanders' idea of Medicare for all. His name is Andy Slavitt. So obviously he supports whatever Obama did. He doesn't support Medicare for all. So it's not surprising that he would attack Medicare for all. And then it just gets into a little bit more regarding Harris's post, which she made an article. So she wrote an article for Medium, which is a website that lets you write articles for them, and then kind of gives it's like a platform essentially for articles. And so she wrote that article and then just kind of mentions a couple more things she said in that article. And yeah, that's about it. So listen, when it comes to these kind of issues regarding Democratic, politicians, you shouldn't be surprised at all when they say things that are, going to always be like middle ground, not even middle ground, many times right-wing ideas, And in this case, Kamala Harris has flip-flopped on the issue of Medicare for all and kind of her healthcare plan so many times. As in they said it here too, and another thing they didn't mention was that after she came out in support of Bernie's plan, Bernie's Medicare for all plan in the Senate, it had I think 16 co-sponsors, 14 co-sponsors, something like that, 14 to 16 co-sponsors if I remember correctly, and Kamala Harris was one of them. Kirsten Gillibrand was another one. Elizabeth Warren was another one. So there was a lot of people out there that were supporting. I think even Cory Booker was one of them. So there was a lot of senators out there that were supporting Bernie Sanders' plan after years of people just like refusing to even acknowledge the existence of a government-run system, being implemented, especially since Obamacare was portrayed as being government-run and it wasn't at all. So, because it involved the insurance companies, obviously, and it has the individual mandate, which, it's a right-wing idea. The whole plan was a right-wing idea that was implemented by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts and championed by right-wingers in the past, too. So, but, this is an issue, obviously, that, like I said, she has flip-flopped on multiple occasions, and Harris knows that she needs to walk a fine line to make sure not to piss off the donors, the establishment, kind of the status quo maintaining, people in the elitist circles of, Washington, D.C. And she wants to walk that fine line because, she knows she knows how her bread is buttered, and she knows what she has to say to get votes. Now, whether this is going to get her votes, ultimately, it's not going to get her votes among progressives, that's for sure. Now, whether it's going to get her votes among the establishment elites and stuff and Democratic loyalists, yeah, definitely, no doubt about it. But the question ultimately comes down to is her plan actually going to work? And in my opinion, it's not, because I don't see any kind of... I don't see this being any different than what Obama... To be fair, it's not the same as Obamacare, obviously, but it kind of goes down that same path. It's that same mentality of doing what Obama said he would do, and then doing doing it just short. Because, oh my God, you don't want to overpromise, right? You don't want to say anything. You don't want to give too many bold promises, God forbid, because if you do, then it's like, to these people, it's like, you're going too far, and then, and then they just, I mean, that's the thing, though. These politicians, they're just so focused on trying to cater. They want to cater to, that establishment elite, and they want to do the things that's going to keep them happy. And it's very unfortunate, because at the end of the day, you're not giving a shit about the people that are truly suffering. And I mean, it's not surprising, but it's disappointing every time you see it happen like that, because I don't know, I guess maybe you expect better. I don't know. Maybe I'm too naive, but I definitely expect better. I don't expect such corruption to take place. Well, I know it's going to take place, but I don't expect this kind of corruption to continue and continue to be allowed, because that's just like, it's very disappointing. And the fact that it continues to be allowed, and the fact that it's something that people don't really care to they don't care to call it out. Only progressives are calling it out is just astonishing to me. So, I mean, if you are okay, if those people are okay with it, then you're going to continue having shitty healthcare. And I just wanted to play you guys a clip. This is a clip of Cenk Uygur of TYT making an appearance on The Rising, which is a show. It's an online show, which is produced by The Hill. The Hill it's a mainstream publication, but this show is actually really good, and it's hosted by two people that are I would say they're left-leaning or to the left for sure. And they bring on a lot of good progressives. They brought on Nina Turner. They brought on Cenk, as I'm going to show you. Kyle Kulinski. I think Michael Brooks, who's also another YouTube host, progressive guy. I believe David Pakman may have gone on there too. So yeah, they brought on a lot of lefties for sure. So I want you guys to hear Cenk here talk about why the role of the insurance companies is not a good idea. He's going to give a really good explanation that I had never thought about myself, and I just want to hear you guys, get you guys to hear this and see how he explains it. Check it out.
So, Cenk, one of the other things that's interesting in the primary recently is this debate over Medicare-for-all. You now have some others coming out saying, well, not Medicare-for-all, Medicare for those who want it, Medicare extra. That really seems to be what the debate is in the party. What do you make of that?
I think it's a trick. So, look, it's not that the public option is disastrous. It would be a slight improvement on the system we have now. That is why progressives fought for it when we were doing the Affordable Care Act. And who sold us out? Establishment Democrats. Joe Lieberman said no, and then Obama and Schumer bowed their heads and said, yes, sir, absolutely, sir. If your corporate donors in Connecticut don't want it, sir, then it's unacceptable. Progressives, the public option is terrible, they told us back then, and we can't have it. We must give in to the Republicans and Joe Lieberman. Well, now they come and tell me that the public option is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, first of all, make up your mind. Second of all, it's obvious that progressives are correct when we keep pushing you further left, because that's where the public is. In a democracy, you might want to appeal to voters. I know it's a wild and crazy idea. Medicare for all polls at 70%. And what? Establishment Democrats say that's not popular enough? No, it's intensely popular with voters. It's not popular with their donors. Somebody's got to say it, for the love of God. It's the corruption, stupid. They're corrupt. That's why they don't want to do it. So in terms of the Medicare extra, their number one problem right now, policy-wise, is if you set up that private insurance option, they'll take the healthiest Americans because they have a profit motive, and they'll drive down the prices for those healthiest Americans. But that's not how insurance works. That ruins the insurance pool, and then they unload all the costliest, sickest people onto Medicare, and then go, oh, can you believe how much it costs? It's a trick. Don't fall for it.
That's a great argument put forth by Cenk Uygur. I mean, that I never thought about that. And I'm not an expert on kind of healthcare and the insurance companies and how they're involved. It's a very complicated topic. But when I heard this, I was like, damn, that's so true. Like, I never thought about that. And Cenk put it perfectly. And he's not somebody I always agree with these days. He's become a little bit too neoliberal-ish in my opinion, and the opinion of many progressives out there. And he seems to be a lot more of a Elizabeth Warren supporter than Bernie. But he's absolutely right on that one. And it's also funny how he points out that progressives were in favor. I remember this too. Progressives were in favor of the public option back when the Obamacare debate was taking place, and they completely got rid of it. They were like, fuck you, we don't want that shit. Oh, public option is terrible. We can't have that. We can't have a public option. Everything has to be private insurance. Now that the debate has been shifted to more of a universal healthcare, Medicare for all, single payer conversation, now they're like, oh, public option, that's wonderful. We bow down to anybody that loves the public option. We have to push for that. That's something that we need. So they're just opportunistic pricks as usual. But that point about insurance that I just want to go, kind of emphasize that a little bit. When Cenk makes that argument there, it's so true. What you do is you put all the money. You put all the, you give the people that have the healthier people. So the people that are healthier, like myself, I'm very healthy. You put me on, on a private insurance plan. I'm not going to be. How much money is it going to cost for me to be on a private insurance plan? I'm not going to get sick that often. Now, somebody that's whatever 50 years older than me, my parents, for example, or some, any of you guys out there, your parents, they're going to need healthcare coverage. They're going to need coverage that's going to be as comprehensive and as as awesome as possible, as great as possible, as useful as possible. It can't be a private insurance plan that's super expensive. So they're going to need a Medicare for all, or more of a Medicare system. Now, if you have those private insurers involved, they're going to put those healthier Americans like myself on that plan, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, that's great, wonderful. You have private insurance. It's great. No problem. See how great it works. But then you put the people that are the sickest that need Medicare, and all the cost is going to be, is going to come out of that because so many of the sick people are going to need that care, and then it's going to cost so much money. And then people say, look how expensive it is. Look at this. This is crazy. Medicare for all or Medicare, it's terrible. Because a lot of people, what they do is they kind of convolute the existence of Medicare and then say, well, because Medicare has its issues, where, by the way, it polls really, really well, Medicare itself. They said, well, look at all the issues there are with Medicare, and then you're going to have those same issues with Medicare for all. I covered an article from a couple, one of the past episodes that I did, where this idiot right-winger was saying, like, oh, look how terrible Medicare is, and there's so much fraud going on in Medicare, and then the same thing is going to happen with Medicare for all. It was a totally ridiculous hack article, not surprisingly, but it's, but that's the thing. These people put out these ridiculous arguments and these statements that just don't make any sense, and they end up looking like idiots. And when it comes to the idea of Medicare, this is what the insurance companies want to do. Anytime, on more specifically, when you have these insurance companies involved, they end up having to be able to get they get their foot in the door, and they're able to influence how Medicare and the kind of the enrollment of Medicare and people on Medicare, how it's going to be, handled. So when the insurance companies are involved, they get to control the kind of the cost effectiveness of Medicare. Like I said, the sicker people are going to need to be on Medicare because that's the government-run program, while the private insurers are going to be better for people like myself who just need to get care every now and then, because then it costs them less. So obviously, because the private insurers, they don't want to give, they don't want to have to be able to give away their, they don't want to be able to, they don't want people to get too much care unless they're paying out of pocket. If they got to pay for it, then it's like, oh my God, we don't want to have that, right? Whereas when you have a government-run program, that comes from the government. And then, many people in the government are bought out by health insurance companies and big pharma. They don't want to have to, they don't want those, they don't want any kind of government to be involved because the private insurers don't want them to be involved. And they're bought out by the private insurers and the healthcare companies and big pharma. So those people tell them what to do, and they said, don't have a government healthcare program. And then that's what Medicare for all is. That's what Medicaid is, Social Security, all that stuff. So, yeah, having the insurance companies involved is a terrible idea. We do not need them there. We do not need them to be dictating our lives and restricting the things that we need to be doing to maintain our quality of life. Our life to where we want to live as long as possible without getting sick, obviously. And they're the ones who just want to make profits off of our lives. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And we have to put a stop to that. So when it comes to Kamala Harris's healthcare plan that we just discussed, obviously what she is doing is she is grifting off of Bernie's Medicare for All plan, calling it Medicare for All, but then it involves private insurers, as we said. And this is something that Bernie Sanders and the progressives and the far left took serious issue with. I know I did for sure. And Bernie Sanders and his camp, they decided to call out Kamala Harris, and they basically said this is not Medicare for all, even though you're calling it Medicare for all. So they came out and criticized her plan, and we're going to get into the details of it here. So why don't you guys check it out here. We're going to read through this a little bit, and then we'll discuss. So this is an article from Vox, it says, you can't call this plan Medicare for all. The Bernie Sanders camp pans Kamala Harris's healthcare plan. And then the subheadline says, her plan, unlike Sanders's, maintains a major role for private insurance. So let's get into the body here. It says, progressive political Twitter is abuzz on the issue of Medicare for all ahead of the second Democratic debate this week. So this was before the debate. With the latest back and forth spurred by Kamala Harris's recently released health care plan. Harris on Monday unveiled what exactly she calls Medicare for all, leading disagreement with Bernie Sanders to finally boil over. Harris had signed on to Sanders' Medicare for all single-payer plan in the Senate when he reintroduced the bill to much fanfare in 2017. But a new proposal she is also calling Medicare for all looks very different. This plan and these distinctions are now garnering major pushback from Sanders' high-level campaign staff. They argue that it's a circuitous, interesting word, it's a circuitous route to universal coverage designed to please industry, while not answering voters' actual demands. And this is quoting Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, Faz Shakir. It says, call it anything you want, but you can't call this plan Medicare for all. Folding to the interests of the health insurance industry is both bad policy and bad politics. The differences between Harris's plan and Sanders' plan come down to two main factors. First, it's phased in over 10 years versus Sanders' 4 years. And Harris's would allow private insurers to compete within the government-run program, similar to the way that Medicare Advantage currently works for adults plan. For older adults plans. Sanders' plan effectively eliminates private insurance. Sanders staffers, including Shakir and speechwriter David Sirota, quickly levied their critiques on Monday, highlighting the downsides of keeping private insurers in the healthcare system. Among the biggest critics that Medicare Advantage has received, for example, is its alleged abuse of billing practices. According to an NPR story, private insurers have overcharged Medicare by $30 billion in the past 3 years alone. So now let me read this tweet from David Sirota that kind of gets into what the article is discussing. It says, and this is quoting David Sirota's Twitter, a tweet from him, from his official Twitter. It says, in contrast to Medicare for all, Senator Harris's healthcare proposal aims to expand Medicare Advantage style plans run by for-profit insurance corporations. Here are things you should know about Medicare Advantage so you understand what that is really all about. And then, so in his tweet, he puts out two pictures. One picture is from, I guess, a website called Modern Healthcare. It was an article from, it's the headline for an article from 2018. It says Medicare Advantage plans could be denying claims to boost profits, and that's what the Human Services Department is saying. And then this is an article from NPR. It says Medicare Advantage plans overbill taxpayers by billions annually, records show. That's pretty damn concerning. Obviously, this is something that Kamala Harris's people know, or they just don't, or maybe they don't know, or they could just be ignoring it. Let's see. So it's continuing on with the article here. It says Harris's plan is being flanked by criticism from the center as well. It's being criticism from the center as well. Former Vice President Joe Biden's campaign called Harris's proposal a Bernie Sanders light Medicare for all and a refusal to be straight with the American middle class, who would have a large tax increase forced on them with this plan. Biden put forth a plan for a public option that would be open to all Americans. Okay. But supporters of Harris's plan argued that her version is a more practical means of getting to universal coverage that preserves a degree of choice that people like. Senator Harris's plan balances idealism and pragmatism, says former Obama Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator Andy Slavitt. This is somebody that I referred to in my last article here, so I guess we're going to quote him here. We weren't able to read what he said there. But let's check out what he says here. So it says, and he continues on here saying, it says, in effect, We have a mandate to get everyone affordable health care and put people over profits. But we don't need to tear down the things that people have and they like in order to do it. Okay, that claim of people liking their health care, their private health care, their private insurance essentially, is bullshit. This is something we went over multiple times. I covered a poll on a segment from one of my one of my past podcasts where I talked about how people would be people. They polled people, and this is fine. You don't have to take the poll. I don't like to take polls seriously, but sometimes it's important to at least point them out so people can make up their own minds. But the poll found out that something was 60%, 65%, almost 70% of people were willing to give up their private insurance companies, so their private insurance healthcare, and get the Medicare-for-all system, the government system, as long as they get to keep their doctors and their providers. So that's significant. That's a big deal. So when somebody like Andy Slavitt, who obviously is an Obama operative and a standing up for the status quo and the establishment, even though he claims to care about ending, people over profits, or ending, the healthcare companies that, put people over profits. He's just, he obviously, he's just standing for whatever Obama wants. So, and then he claims that people, you don't want to get, there's no need to tear down the things people have and they like in order to do it. You see, notice they never go into polls. This is something the mainstream media does too. They just say, oh, people love their insurance. People love their insurance. But then if you actually go into the details and be like, okay, well, would you be willing to, for example, get a Medicare-for-all system? And they'll probably answer, if I get to keep my doctor, and they do. In many cases, that's what Bernie Sanders is proposing. You get to pick your doctor. Not only do you get to pick your doctor, but you get to keep it too. So let's continue on here. It says it's very simple. There's an option for choice, says Brookings Fellow and former Obama administration healthcare advisor Kavita Patel. And then this is somebody that I think what is this? This is a guy that's working for the Center for American Progress. This is interesting because I discussed on the last podcast about how the Center for American Progress put together a Medicare-for-all, what was it called? Medicare Extra or something? Yeah, Medicare Extra plan that, they support and they're pushing, and then they're trying to get, obviously all the other Democrats to push for it as well. And then, so one of the people that works there, Topher Spiro, he tweeted, "The Harris plan is essentially Medicare for all who want it, to build a smooth, natural pathway to Medicare for all." And then he follows up that tweet with, "This plan guarantees universal coverage in the short term while allowing families to move over to the Medicare plan at their own pace." It says ultimately, and this is continuing on with the article, it says ultimately the difference between the two campaigns isn't just about this particular policy, it's also about the kind of change for which they're willing to advocate. Sanders' team is questioning Harris's commitment to Medicare for all, her bona fides with the left, and her willingness to prioritize industry criticism. Harris, meanwhile, has attempted to frame herself both as a progressive dedicated to pursuing ambitious plans and someone uninterested in major disruption. Yeah, big surprise. And it's quoting her here during an interview she had in New Hampshire, on a New Hampshire radio station. She says, "I'm not trying to upend markets. I'm not trying to, overhaul entire systems." Sanders has been clear that he has no problem with disruption. Quoting Bernie here, it says, "The current system is already disrupting and destabilizing millions of people's lives." That's a very good statement. That's a very good response. I think it seems like he was responding to what she said. So the rest of the article just gets into how the role of private insurers in the future of healthcare is it's the main thing that Democrats are focusing on, and the other part is saying how Harris argues that her and Bernie had the same goal, and the experts say keeping private insurance in the system it complicates it. Yeah, I guess that's true. It definitely complicates it for sure. But if you guys want to check that out, you can take a look at that article. But but that's, listen, you just can't you can't trust anything that these establishment candidates say. You just can't. You can't rely on it to be really like getting to the core, like addressing the core problems that we have, especially when it comes to something like healthcare. Healthcare is such an important thing. It's something that people are suffering with not having. So like they don't have it. They're suffering without it, essentially, and this is something that, that the Democratic Party, if they want to be taken seriously, they need to be doing bold things. If they want to, if it has to disrupt the system as it being disruptive of the system, then that's what you have to do. Just like Bernie said, if anything, this system that we have right now is being disruptive for the American people, millions and millions of people in the United States, where, what is it? I don't know how many people aren't insured in this country. I mean, when Obamacare got implemented, it only insured 30 million people, right? So that only put 30 million people on insurance. And now that's the private insurance because it's mandated. It's an individual mandate, so it's obviously not public. It's not public, government-run healthcare, but it's something that like that was a Band-Aid. That was putting a Band-Aid on a gangrenous wound, That was fixing something with a very small solution that's not going to ultimately tackle it and, end it for good. It's something that's going to continue, it's going to continue our problems. It's going to some extent or another, probably going to perpetuate our problems too, because of the fact that the insurance companies are still involved. And, when you're having a discussion about how government should be involved, I mean, I can understand people's kind of hesitance to not wanting the government to, for example, spy on them, and to want to get involved in endless wars, and not wanting to, infringe on our rights, our free speech rights, our liberties, our, constitutional rights. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. But there are some things, as many people know. I mean, look at the government running the fire stations, firefighters, police, military, as I just mentioned, waging multiple wars, 8 wars that we're doing right now. That's all government-run stuff. That's government-run programs. Are you opposed to government-run programs when it comes to, when it comes to the military? I don't know. I mean, but it just seems like these people, they just like government when it benefits what they want. So in the case of like politicians like this, they just want government that's good for what benefits them. So if they want to go and start endless wars and unconstitutional wars and stuff, that stuff works out great for them. But when it comes to doing things that help actual people, that stuff like, oh no, pump your brakes. You don't want to do too much on that because it's too much government. All of a sudden it's too much government for them. But it's not too much government when it involves, all those other things, all those things that people need. And the problem is that a lot of people are just not educated on healthcare. And the conversation of healthcare has become so poisoned by right-wing misinformation. And a lot of this right-wing misinformation is stuff that Democrats fall for. And a lot of the establishment politicians that are on the in the Democratic Party, they push and they think it's real because they want to appeal to like the so-called moderate voters. So they push the same talking points that is coming from the right wing. And honestly, a lot of it is also coming from the health insurance industry and the big pharmaceuticals and the people that are buying out. At one point, it was like probably only Republicans, and not only, but it was like a huge margin of Republicans compared to Democrats. And now it's like both parties. It's basically both parties now. And granted, it's not the entire Democratic Party. I contest that it's definitely the entirety of the Republican Party. But Democrats, it's probably, I would say, at least 60%. It's got to be 50, 60% of them, at least. If not more. I'm probably being too modest. Maybe even 70% of them. And all of the Republican Party, for sure. And that's the problem. That's the main problem. It's the money in politics that is forcing these people, allowing these people to put forth these talking points that are just complete bullshit. And the idiots and the rubes out there fall for it because they don't want to be, oh my God, I don't want the government-run healthcare to ruin my life somehow. So it's just absurd, and don't fall for this kind of stuff. It's ridiculous, and anybody that really wants to live a better life and a better quality of life, you need to have a government-run system that is truly going to help regular people. And if you don't, then it's just going to end up helping the super rich and the people that are already well, obviously they're wealthy and they're already well taken care of, and those are the people that are going to be able to get what they want, while the people that are dying from cancer and horrible other horrible diseases and illnesses that they can't fix, and those are the ones that are going to suffer, while the rich just continue to get away with whatever they want. So another topic that involves Kamala Harris is some that I want to discuss about was her student debt plan. So she has a student loan debt plan that is just like her healthcare plan that we just discussed, horrible. And it is not comprehensive. It does not rock the boat. It does not do anything, over the top, because, as I've said about any establishment politician like Kamala Harris, she knows how her bread is buttered, and she is going to continue to perpetuate the system that involves the health insurance. I'm sorry, in this case, the big corporations and the people that continue to screw us over. So let's get into the article here a little bit. So this is the headline of the article. This is from CNBC.com. And the title is Presidential Candidate Kamala Harris has a student debt forgiveness plan, but it's complicated. So let's check out the article here, the body of the article. It says, student debt has become a central issue in the 2020 presidential campaign. First, Senator Elizabeth Warren proposed canceling $640 billion of it. Then Senator Bernie Sanders said he would erase all $1.6 trillion of it. Now Kamala Harris has released a plan to forgive student debt. Well, sort of. Borrowers will have a lot of boxes to check before they can get the $20,000 in student debt forgiveness on the table in her proposal. They will have to be 1, a Pell Grant recipient who 2, starts a business in a disadvantaged community, and 3, manages to keep that business afloat for at least 3 years. Compared to what we've seen from candidates like Senator Sanders and Senator Warren, it's a much more narrow proposal, said Julie Margetta Morgan, a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute. I think that's a progressive think tank, I believe. So narrow as to be absurd, said Matt Brunig, founder of the People's Policy Project. When you look at the requirements, it's hard to imagine more than a handful of people would ever qualify for it. And then it shows a chart here. It talks about the student debt boom, which has gone up to, I guess, totaling all there's different age groups here. Here, I can post it on the screen for you guys. So it says, so people under 30, it shows the amount of debt they have. People that are between 30 and the ages of 30 and 39, between the ages of 40 and 49, between the ages of 50 and 59, and the people that are above 60 years old. And it seems like majority of it seems to be somewhere between the people that are 30 and 39 and under 30. For sure. Yeah, the rest of the people, not so much. Student debt was, I guess the kind of the student debt that was racking up back in the day. So for people that were, a little bit older, 40 to 60 years old, essentially, and 60 and above, obviously wasn't as much for people that are, 30, or was it under 40 years old, essentially. So in the, just outside of the millennial kind of bracket, and then in the millennial bracket. So those are the people that are suffering definitely the most through through student loan debt. So continuing on here, it says Americans are now more burdened by loans they took out for their education than credit card or auto debt. The average college graduate leaves school $30,000 in the red today, up from $10,000 in the 90s. See what I say? And 28% of student loan borrowers are in delinquency or default. Wow, delinquency or default. The differences between the proposals represent a wider divide in how candidates have appraised the state of higher education in the United States. Some candidates conclude the system has devolved into dysfunction and a reset button must be pressed. This is evidenced by how Warren and Sanders say student debt threatens the prosperity of an entire generation. Meanwhile, another camp thinks the burden of student debt poses opportunities and are, quote, pushing for options that basically condition debt relief on doing something that they find valuable to society. Margetta Morgan, the same person from before, said, that works for the Roosevelt Institute. Indeed, a senior policy advisor for the Harris campaign told CNBC her plan is not a student debt proposal. Okay. This is just one pillar that supports the senator's broader proposal to invest and support black entrepreneurs. Okay, but the plan, as you may have heard, I'm going to get into the people that are kind of mocking it a little bit more in a second here. But if you may have heard, it says that it wants people that are, disadvantaged youth and I guess people of color, entrepreneurs of color, they have to be running a business for 3 years until they can qualify for Pell Grants. That's crazy. 3 years? you know how hard it is for somebody to have a business open for 1 year, for 2 years, let alone 3 years. Come on, man, it's crazy. I mean, how out of touch do you have to be to think that anybody can do this and then make that as a qualification for, make that as a qualification for why you should receive Pell Grants, not even fucking, student loan, kind of getting your student loan debt, wiped out like as Bernie Sanders' $1.6 trillion plan does. And then it says here, under Harris's proposal, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would also be tasked with reducing discrimination against entrepreneurs of color, and a $12 billion grant program for black and minority business owners would be created. And black students receive about a quarter of Pell Grant funding, though they make up just 15%. 15% of college students overall. It says, yet others expressed concern about the plan to tie debt relief to opening a business, an act which itself can require taking on additional debt. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Starting a business is an incredibly risky venture for anybody, said Tiffany Jones, Director of Higher Education Policy at the Education Trust, a nonprofit advocacy organization in Washington, let alone, she said, for the low-income students which are using Pell Grants. And it says here in parentheses, it says the grants typically go to students from families with an income below $20,000. Last year, 7 million people received them. Harris's proposal even acknowledges that black entrepreneurs are most likely to rely on personal credit cards carrying balances than traditional bank loans. And when they do get a loan, are more likely to be offered a smaller amount and pay higher interest rates. And around half of businesses with employees don't survive even 5 years, according to the Small Business Association. Even most businesses that are not started by people who were right out of college and are not located in disadvantaged areas fail, Matt Brunig said. Let's see, it says the senior policy advisor for the Harris campaign countered that the risk involved would be reduced by the fact that borrowers could suspend their student loan payments without interest accruing for the first 3 years, during which they're getting business off the ground. Yeah, but still, I mean, the incentive is, what kind of incentive is that? They're trying to pretend as if it's an incentive program, but it's not. And here we got a chart here. I'm going to put it up for you guys if you want to check it out here. So it says student debt demographics. So it said these are the different student debt levels. It says this is an average for bachelor's degree recipients with loans in 2016. So this is a 2016 poll, 2016 chart. So it says black people, they accrue. Let's see, they accrue 30. So in 2016, they accrued on average $33,993. Black people, African Americans. White people accrued an average of $30,093. All people accrued an average of $29,669. Native Hawaiian and or Pacific Islander accrued an average of $26,515. American Indian or Alaska Native accrued $26,380. Asians accrued $25,447. Hispanic and or Latino accrued $25,452. And this one is share. So the percentage of the share with student debt. So this is based on percentages. And this is a share of the bachelor's, people with bachelor's degrees with loans in 2016. And let's see, it says, so the share of the student debt that the Hawaiian and or Pacific Islanders accrue is 89.4%. The share of the student debt that Black or African American people accrue is 84.9%. The share of the student debt that American Indian or Alaska Natives accrue is 76.1%. The share of the student debt that white people accrue is 69.4%. The share that that all people accrue is 68.9%. The share that Hispanic and Latino accrue is 66.3%, and the share that Asians accrue is 45.1%. So, if you're able to keep up, that's a interesting graph to check out based on to kind of get an idea of where people are when it comes to student loan debt, as far as demographics and everything. Continuing on with the article here, it says, still many Pell Grant recipients will likely find it difficult to walk away from their jobs and start a business in the first place, said Jacob William Faber, a sociologist at New York University who studies racial economic disparity. Quoting him, it says, this is tied to a bigger kind of bootstrap myth about economic mobility. Other critics said the plan is simply too complicated. If we've learned anything from the public service loan forgiveness debacle, it's the need to keep loan forgiveness programs simple and straightforward, said Mark Kantrowitz, the publisher of SavingForCollege.com. Less than 1% of applicants have walked away from their debt under that program due to wonky requirements and a failure by the education department and its servicers to explain them. The strategy of Harris's proposal was most likely a rhetorical one, Brunig said. Its narrowness seemed a direct nod at those who say Warren and Sanders' plans suffer from being overly broad and unrealistic. Quoting Brunig one more time here, it says, it's done in the form of a student debt forgiveness plan, but it's really a way to critique student debt forgiveness. So, yeah, that's a good breakdown and a good criticism of Kamala Harris's plan. Again, she's doing another plan, just like her Medicare-for-all plan. When it comes to student loan debt forgiveness, she's doing a plan that is catering to the establishment and catering to people that don't want anything bold or quote-unquote unrealistic to happen. So this is something to please those people and not actually help people that need the student loan debt to be wiped away. Like I said, as Bernie Sanders' plan, or to some extent Elizabeth Warren's plan, which I believe is just a grift off of Bernie's plan. But to some extent, hers is much better than Kamala Harris's. And then so I wanted to read you guys the tweet that Kamala Harris put out here. It says, yesterday I announced that as president, I'll establish a student loan debt forgiveness program for Pell Grant recipients who start a business that operates for tweet tweet got so much attention. This was posted on July 27th. It got so much attention from people on Twitter, and it got ratioed like crazy. So the people that were commenting, I was one of the people that commented on it. If you look at the numbers, so the number of retweets it got, it was 2.5 thousand, so 2,500 retweets, and then 11,000 likes. But the number of comments was 12,700 comments. So like responses to the tweet. That means that largely majority of them were disagreements, and I know that because I saw the tweets, and a lot of them were from progressives like myself. And she just got ratioed like hell, and deservedly so, because it's a horrible plan. And if that wasn't, so if those numbers specifically showing, her getting ratioed doesn't convince you how bad her plan is and how much people disagree with her, let's get into some of the tweets that people left. So this is somebody that's commenting, Camilla Londono. This is all on Twitter. And so Camilla Londono says, I work at an incubator in a university that is deeply committed to innovation in a city that has what feels like an incubator in every corner. And this is so absurd. A lot of new businesses fail, and they take a lot of money and effort regardless of success. Who does this help? And then another person, Adriana Lacey, says, so she responds to Kamala's tweet and says, there's a lot going on here. Just trying to understand who these people are who were granted Pell Grants, but also have the capital to start a business in a disadvantaged area and can ensure it is successful for at least 3 years. Exactly. Ed Zitrone says, what do we want? Student loan forgiveness for Pell Grant recipients. When do we want it? After operating a business for 3 years in disadvantaged communities. It's like one of those chants that they do in like school, like pep rallies. What do we want? When are we going to get it? And then Rob Delaney. Rob Delaney is a guy, I think he's an American guy that's living in the UK. So he comments on a lot of the stuff that's going on in American politics. He's a Bernie supporter too, I think. He says, yesterday I announced, so he's responding to Kamala Harris's tweet. Yesterday I announced that, as president, I'll establish a student loan debt forgiveness program for men named Kevin. I'm one of them. Men named Kevin who can bench their wives 10 times on the top of a Winnebago at 15 miles per hour. Hopefully, I don't think I'm ever going to have a Winnebago, but I am Kevin. And then Brandy Jensen here says, yesterday I announced that as president, I'll establish a student loan debt forgiveness program for Pell Grant recipients who start a hair salon that has a pun name. Sheer madness. Jack the Clipper, do or die, DYE, etc. Oh man, you gotta love it. And then let's see, one more tweet here. It says, Rob, his Twitter name is Rob Wisman. This is like one of those things where if you eat a 72-ounce steak, you don't have to pay for it. Oh my god, I love when people troll politicians or just people on Twitter. Anybody really on Twitter like with shit like this. It's hilarious. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what Kamala Harris is doing. Honestly, she just seems to be like pissing in the wind. It doesn't seem like she's very serious about trying to truly do anything that is going to fix the serious problems that we have in this country. There's nothing else I can say. This article articulates it perfectly. The people that commented and mocked it. I was one of the people that mocked her tweet as well and her plan as well. I mean, there's just nothing else. What can you say to stuff like this? It's so uninspiring. It's so uninteresting that it's like you can't, nobody gets inspired by stuff like this. Nobody's going to go out there and be like, oh my God, this person is saying something so wonderful and so inspiring and so great. And so, I can totally get on board with this. And I'm so pumped to vote for this person. There's nothing that's going to pump anybody up for somebody honestly, like somebody like Kamala Harris when she puts out plans like this. I mean, she's already uninteresting as it is. And people are like fucking fawning over her. I'm just talking about, obviously, when I say these things, I'm saying it from my own perspective. But obviously, there are people that are pumped up for her, but I don't really understand why. they just think that a lot of people just treat Kamala Harris as like the next coming of Barack Obama, and somewhat in the same mold as Hillary Clinton as well. But it's just like but that's the problem. That's the exact issue. We don't need somebody like Barack Obama. He was already president, even though he would probably win in a presidential race against Trump if he was running. Barack Obama might have won he would have actually won a third term, I think. But even if he was able to do that, and somebody like Barack Obama was somebody that people would have wanted, that doesn't mean that we need him or somebody like him. Let alone somebody like Hillary Clinton. It's even worse. But so these plans that she put out there, Medicare-for-all plan, her student loan debt forgiveness plan, which isn't even a student loan debt forgiveness, it's just giving people Pell Grants that run a business for 3 years, which is ridiculous. And then her record as Attorney General is fucking horrible, as we documented. So it's just, she's got fucking red flags all over the place, man. So what the hell's the point of even voting for this person if they come in with all these terrible fucking problems? I just don't get it. What do people see in her other than the fact that she's a black woman of color? That's it. And she's very strong and she's very tough and she can take on Trump. Ooh, wonderful. But then if you get into the details of it, she's not good at all. So it makes no sense. So I don't know. Whatever, man. If you're into the idea of Kamala Harris as president, have fun with it, because you're not going to get too many people on your side. So Joe Biden, in all his horribleness, continues to become more and more horrible. He doesn't seem to be giving a shit anymore, and he's just making a fool of himself at this point. Not that he wasn't already, obviously, but he's just making more of a fool of himself. And he continues to shit on millennials for no reason, basically. And so I'm going to read you guys a Huffington Post article here. It's a pretty quick piece. It's just documenting some comments he made here towards millennials. So the title of the article says, Joe Biden to millennials: don't tell me how bad it is. Change it. Yeah, very condescending tone right there, Joe. We appreciate it. And then in the subheadline it says, young people are facing a dark financial future, but the Democratic presidential candidate doesn't want to hear it if they aren't going to get politically involved. And then let's get into the body here. It says, former Vice President Joe Biden has a message for the millennial generation. Stop complaining if you aren't going to engage with politics. The 2020 Democratic presidential contender stood by the skepticism he expressed last year when asked about young adults' belief that they face outsized hurdles to secure housing and pay off debt. I have no empathy for it. Give me a break, Biden said in 2018. Asked to explain what he meant, Biden began talking about his personal experience growing up with very modest means and how he felt upon learning about a study that found relatively few young people today would consider running for political office. We have an obligation to get engaged, Biden said at Saturday's AFSCME forum, co-moderated by HuffPost. You all have an obligation to get engaged. Don't tell me how bad it is. Change it, change it, change it. I love how he's trying to sound like he's pretending like he's sounding inspiring, like he's motivating people. And then he added, my generation did it. Yeah, your generation of like fucking old dudes and women that are dying off. How can you expect people to be inspired to want to do this, to run for office when the fucking political system is so fucked up? Okay, we're gonna get into that in a second. But anyway, it says Biden drew some criticism the first time he went after millennials, more than a year before he announced his candidacy. Conservative New York Times opinion writer and climate denier Bret Stephens later sided with Biden in a column criticizing the millennial generation, which Stephens said specializes in histrionic self-pity and moral self-righteousness. As HuffPost's Michael Hobbs reported in 2017, there is a large amount of research and data that paints a bleak financial future for young people, many of whom are already reporting that they are finding themselves priced out of the housing market. Although Biden has consistently polled highest among the wide field of 2020 Democratic presidential contenders, his supporters skew older and more moderate. At the forum, he went on to say, "I just don't want people telling me on a college campus, 'Oh, woe is me. I've got it so bad. Come on.'" So, as usual, Joe Biden trying to, be condescending and talking down to people that are suffering through student loan debt and not having a decent, paying job, and having to suffer through, issues of whether it's income inequality, whether, some of them may have health problems, some of them, as I said, are dealing with student loan debt. They, they're living, some of them are homeless even sometimes, some of them are forced to join the military even a lot of times. And then he's like, "Oh, well, why don't you just run for office?" Well, how are people going to run for office when the political system is so absolutely corrupted and fucked up by big corporations and lobbyists and donors and all that stuff? You actually expect to inspire, this is an inspiring message telling them to change it. That's not going to inspire anybody to want to run for office. That's totally the total opposite is going to happen. This is not going to get people to get on board with you, Joe. So if you think, talking down to people like that and saying, "Well, my generation did it," okay, yeah, but your generation is a bunch of old farts and people that were honestly not living. First of all, they were not living in a corrupted system as much as it is corrupted right now. I mean, if you consider the impact of the campaign finance system, so how the policies that were implemented that fucked up the campaign finance system. If you go from Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United and everything in between, and even after, these policies have, I think McCutcheon is another one, the McCutcheon ruling. These policies have all these kind of this, whether it's legislation or Supreme Court decisions or whatever, all these things have had an impact on the political climate and the political, kind of the political world in general, not just America, and all over the world. It's fucked up because of us too. I mean, just the fact that, we're getting politicians into office right now that are bought out by the military-industrial complex, who fulfill those donors that give them money in the military-industrial complex, and then they push for wars, and they push for endless wars to bomb brown people in 8 different countries, and then people like Joe Biden, who voted for the Iraq War, who pretty much supported every single disastrous war that we're currently in, even when he was vice president under Obama, let alone the Iraq War when he was in the Senate. He's trying to lecture people and tell them, pretending as if it's so easy to just run for president. I'm sorry, not run for president necessarily, but whatever, run for public office, whether it's president, Senate, Congress, State House, whatever. And as if you just run for these political, these political, positions, these public office positions, and automatically, everything is going to be wonderful and it's going to be easy and you're going to be able to get change so easily. I mean, look at somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is somebody that spoke out so heavily in favor, heavily against the likes of Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic establishment, and she's gotten just completely brutalized by them because she dares to speak out against them. And even the people that claim to love her so much, they're like, "Oh, I love Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but she needs to learn to work within the system a little bit more. She needs to get, basically trained by other politicians to be more like them, so that she's basically what they're saying is they don't want her to disrupt the system." Something, obviously, as we mentioned, we were talking about earlier, that Bernie Sanders is in favor of disrupting the system, just as, I feel that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, especially since she's a Bernie Sanders supporter and was, supported, pushed heavily by Bernie Sanders and groups affiliated with him. But she wants to disrupt the system, and God forbid she disrupts anything that ruins the day of poor Queen Nancy Pelosi over there, Speaker of the House. God forbid you make her angry and protest in her office to push for climate change, and then stuff like that, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went in with the Sunrise Movement, which is a great organization. She went with them and she protested in Nancy Pelosi's office like a day or two after she won her seat in Congress in New York, which she was outnumbered she was outspent like 10-1 by Joe Crowley, who was in that seat for like almost 2 decades, and he was the successor to Nancy Pelosi, ironically, and she ended up beating him. And she was protesting in Nancy Pelosi's office, and she got a ton of hate for it. And God forbid you don't do what the Queen Pelosi says, and you dishonor her her throne. God forbid can't do that. Like it's like apparently that's like stabbing some Democratic loyalist voters. I'm talking about actual voters. That's stabbing them in the back. They don't like that. It's just crazy. Like, people like this, they just don't value the idea of dissent, especially when it's within their own party. So it's because notice that when the Republican Party, they had that kind of whole uprising with the Tea Party. So Republicans were scared shitless of the Tea Party when they took over, especially. I think the only reason why they were forced to give in to what the Tea Party demanded was because the Tea Party was being bankrolled by the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers run the Republican Party too. So they were bankrolling everything. Basically, they were running the whole operation and then allowing basically a coup to happen within the Republican Party, getting rid of a lot of moderates and a lot of kind of centrist Republicans, and so-called Republicans. Honestly, they're not really that centrist and they're not really that moderate, but that's what Washington considers them to be. They're just basically like conservatives that aren't like super, I guess, religious and super like anti-abortion and stuff like that. They're just not like seen as super like radical. But the people that were in the Tea Party that were trying to take over, they were all radical. They were all, anti-abortion, super religious, super anti-government, talking about Obamacare being a government takeover, all that stuff that was going on. This was back in 2009, and they ended up taking over the Congress in 2010, which was only, this was after Obamacare was passed too. And Nancy Pelosi was only running Congress under a Democratic, under both houses, both the Senate and the House. This was only 2 years where Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House when the Democrats had control of both House and Senate. And she managed to get Obamacare through because of that. She had that, but ultimately she ended up losing the whole thing because she continued to push for shitty centrist policies like Obamacare. And this was at a time, as we discussed earlier, the ideas... Cenk Uygur, I played a clip of Cenk Uygur talking about how the idea of Obamacare was pushed, the whole idea of individual mandate and a right-wing plan. That was the plan that Democrats wanted. They didn't want the public option. Obviously, they want the public option now. But back in 2009, when the Tea Party was running, the public option was, that was no way. There was no way the Democrats were going to consider that. I'm sorry, before the Tea Party rose to fame, the Democrats were no way they were going to push for the public option. They saw that as too radical. Now they see Medicare-for-all as too radical. So, but when it comes to this whole idea of, kind of getting involved in government, it's way too corrupt, and it's way too run by big corporations, as far as being donors and stuff, and lobbyists representing those corporations, and corrupting all these politicians that they're in there, and then they claim to be kind of standing up on behalf of the people, and in reality they're just standing up on behalf of those donors and those corporations that have lobbyists that are bribing them. So they just do whatever their corporate masters tell them, and that's what it's all about. They don't care about the people. They claim to. They just say they care about the people as a talking point, but they don't actually care about people. They don't actually care about what regular people are suffering through. It's all about pleasing their corporate donors, and that's what Democrats have become. And Joe Biden has been like that pretty much his entire career, if not his entire career for sure. And he's always been a moderate, always been a fucking, basically might as well be like Republican, in drag basically. I'm sorry, a Democrat in drag. In reality, he's just a Republican who has a D in front of his name, and he's talking about how people have to get involved or just shut up. Basically, if you don't want to get involved, shut the hell up. Fuck off. That's basically what he's telling young people. And he lectured he lectured millennials before, as they mentioned in this article. He was doing like some sort of like sit down interview, town hall kind of thing.
Yet public service seems now not to be held in very high esteem.
No, it's not. And no, but it's not just because, I'll be very blunt, it's not just because of our president. It's a whole lot of things. I only had 2 political heroes in my whole life. And this is not new. I've said this since 1972. Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. And up to that point, there was a war raging. There was a bitter fight over even whether we should talk about the environment. Women were still viewed as second-class citizens and not prepared to have significant jobs, thought that. And we were told the people didn't talk to one another over the war. And we were told, drop out, go out to Haight-Asbury, get engaged. Now, shortly after I graduated in '68, Kent State, 17 kids shot dead. And so the younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No. I have no empathy for it. Give me a break.
He just has so much contempt for millennials. Joe Biden is like that, compared to Bernie Sanders, who doesn't do these kind of things, and he's older than Biden is. But Joe Biden is the old grandpa guy who goes out there and just, lectures people about, what they should and shouldn't believe in, what they should and shouldn't do, and acts like he's like educated them, And in reality, he's just a condescending prick. That's all Joe Biden is, and that's all he's going to be. And this is another example of that. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of our show today. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a great episode again, and I just wanted to let you guys know before we get going, once again, don't forget to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/ProgBlacksmith if you can become a patron and give me a generous contribution. It would be greatly appreciated. Also, remember, if you want more information about this podcast, check out the hashtag #TheProgSquare on Twitter. That will direct you to all of my live broadcasts on Periscope, as well as every segment I post on YouTube. Thank you again, as usual, for joining us, my Periscope viewers, my Facebook viewers. Obviously, we're going to be back again next week, and we will see you then. Take care, everybody.